How are you guys doing? Today is Friday, March 19th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual profile on Clayton Kershaw, who I believe is one of the greatest players to ever play the game of baseball, which is why I believe he deserves a GOAT profile, because I believe he stands out amongst the elites. And if you're unfamiliar with Clayton Kershaw, he's probably one of the best pitchers of our time. Just on the mound, he has incredible control. He has probably one of the nastiest curveballs, slider, combos, throws an incredible fastball. And yes, he is getting older, and I guess the zip of his pitches is kind of going away as his back is going through injury after injury. But I think that when he lines up on the mound for 2021, Clayton Kershaw is he's definitely going to be a pitcher that will be feared on the mound. And now that he has the ring that he's been chasing his entire career, that he's no longer chasing it, who's to know what weight will be lifted off his shoulders going forward? So with that said, without further ado, I'm just going to give a little bit of context, and hopefully his accomplishments and his accolades speak for themselves as they describe and as they kind of put into words why I believe that Clayton Kershaw is one of the best pitchers to ever play the game. So to give the background, he's originally from Dallas, and he was drafted 7th overall in the 2006 MLB draft after being established as one of the greatest high school prospects ever. There was a high school game, and I'm not sure if this is completely real or not, but I think he pitched a perfect game with all strikeouts in high school. And because it's Clayton Kershaw, I actually believe it, because he's virtually doing very similar things in the pros. But he had committed to Texas A&M, but then after being named the Gatorade National Player of the Year, he would enter the 2006 MLB draft, and then he would be taken by the Los Angeles Dodgers pretty high up. And then after being taken by the Dodgers, he made his way through the farm system in just a season, and he would go on to crack the major leagues when he was 20 years old in 2008, holding a title as the youngest player in the MLB for a good year. So that's what Clayton Kershaw was up to. So in Clayton Kershaw's first season in the pros, in 2008, he would go on to start 21 games in a season where the Dodgers would end up with an 84-78 record, with the best record in the NL West, by the way. In the season, he would finish with a 5-5 record with a 4.26 ERA, throwing 107 innings. In those 107 innings, he allowed 109 hits, just one or two more hits than he had allowed innings pitched, because he had 107.2 innings pitched. He would still go on to strike out 100 batters, and even though he was a rookie playing at age 20, the fact that he was able to not fall incredibly behind and kind of keep his head above water in the pros. And this would be the only season for the rest of his career, except for 2019, in which he had he had an ERA above 3 for the season, which is actually insane. And I guess following this is going to go into what could possibly be one of the greatest stretches that a pitcher has ever had in the history of baseball. So following the season, once they made the playoffs, the Dodgers would end up beating the Cubs in the NLDS, and they would lose to the Cubs in the National League they lost to the Phillies in the National League Championship Series, the year that the Philadelphia Phillies would go on to win the World Series, when the Phillies had won 8 more games in the regular season. So this would transition into Clayton Kershaw's second season with the Dodgers in 2009, his age 21 season. For the first time in his career, he would start 30 games. He started 30 of the 31 games he would play in a season where the Dodgers would make the playoffs yet again with a 95-67 record. That's 11 more wins than the previous season. Clayton Kershaw would put up an 8-8 record. You would say at about 500, but he got more wins, but with more losses too. He put up a 2.79 ERA in his first full season as a pitcher, and I guess it is his first full season. At age 21, remember, might I remind you yet again to remind you. And for this whole season, he was 21 years old. He pitched 171 innings. He allowed 119 hits in those 171 innings, which is incredibly insane. And then he would strike out 185 batters in those 171 innings. Of course, he had more strikeouts than innings pitched and more innings pitched than hits allowed. Age 21, didn't make an all-star game, but he was still starting to be recognized as one of the best young pitchers in all of baseball. This would transition into the playoffs, where they would beat the Cardinals, but then they would lose to the Phillies in the championship series again. But I think in 2009, the Phillies would lose. This would transition into the stretch where the Dodgers missed the playoffs for a bit, but then after that, the Dodgers would have missed the playoffs. So transitioning into 2010, which would be Clayton Kershaw's third season in the league and his final season before he was named an All-Star. In his third season in the MLB, his first season, he threw over 200 innings pitched. He would start 32 innings for a Los Angeles Dodgers team that finished with an 80-82 record, finishing fourth in the West. They had 15 less wins than the season prior, but Clayton Kershaw would still put up a pretty good season. He would finish with a 13-10 record, the first time he eclipsed a double-digit amount of wins. The first time he also eclipsed a double-digit amount of losses. He put up a 2.91 ERA, which is the second straight season he's put up an ERA below 3. He would pitch 204 innings, like I just said, the first time he's ever pitched 200 innings. He would allow 160 hits in those 204 innings, and he would strike out 212 batters in those 204 innings. So, of course, for the second year in a row, he'd have more strikeouts than innings pitched and hits, as he would also throw for a complete game and a shutout. He wouldn't yet gain the recognition, but now people had their eyes on Clayton Kershaw, even though the Dodgers didn't make the playoffs that year. Transitioning into Clayton Kershaw's 2011 season, this might go down as one of his best, if not his best season that he's ever that he's ever put together statistically as a baseball player. So in the context of baseball, the Triple Crown can mean two things. If you're a hitter, it means you lead the entire league, the American League or the National League, in batting average, home runs, and RBIs, runs batted in, all at the same time. For pitchers, I believe it's if you lead in wins, earned run average, and strikeouts. And Clayton Kershaw in 2011 was actually able to lead the league in wins, ERA, and strikeout in 2011, giving him his only Triple Crown in his MLB career, which would go down as one of his best, in a season where he would go on to he started 33 games, and the Dodgers would miss the playoffs for the second year in a row, but they won 2 more games. And then in Clayton Kershaw's Triple Crown season and his first All-Star season, might I add, he would also win the Gold Glove too. He would finish with a 21-5 record. The 21 wins led the National League. That is the first time you would ever lead the league in wins in his entire career. He finished with a 2.28 ERA in 233 innings, which is a 30-inning increase from the previous season. He threw 5 complete games, and 2 of them were shutouts. And then within all this, within the 233 innings he pitched, he would allow 174 hits, which is incredible, which is 60 less hits than innings pitched. He would also strike out 248 batters, which led all of the National League, which would lead with his 228 batting average, which was incredible. And of course, he would go on to win the first ever Cy Young in his career, which would start to cement his name alongside some of the greats. But at that time, this was the first time he had won an All-Star, and there have been many Cy Youngs who had just been one-season wonders. So, of course, following that season, Clayton Kershaw had to prove that his Triple Crown season was not a fluke. Just coincidentally, that's at about the point where where Shane Bieber is in his career right now, where Clayton Kershaw was in about 2011, about 10 years ago-ish. That makes sense. And then in 2012, Clayton Kershaw in his age 24 season, his fourth season with the Dodgers, his fourth full season with the Dodgers, his fifth season with the Dodgers. I'm tripping. Clayton Kershaw will go on to start 33 games in a season where the Dodgers have missed the playoffs for the third season in a row. But this would be the last season. This would be the last season that the Dodgers have missed the playoffs, like currently. Up until today, to this day, the most recent season the Dodgers missed the playoffs was in 2012. And in this season, Clayton Kershaw would go on and put up a 14-9 record, of course, putting up another All-Star season. He would go on to lead the National League in ERA for the second year in a row with a 2.53 ERA, the fourth year in a row in which he had tossed an ERA below 3. And the fact that this was only his second All-Star game is a crime. But of course, I'll continue. He threw 2 complete game shutouts for the season, and in the 227 innings that he pitched, he would allow 170 hits, which of course would be less hits than innings pitched for the fourth year in a row. And then of course he threw 229 strikeouts, which is 2 more strikeouts than innings pitched, which made it the fourth time he had thrown more strikeouts than innings pitched at the same time as well. He would finish, in addition to being an all-star, he would finish as a runner-up in the Cy Young Award, and this time the winner would be R.A. Dickey for the Mets. And even though the Dodgers would miss the playoffs, Clayton Kershaw was continuing to show the rest of baseball why he's one of the best players to ever play. And he also showed the rest of baseball that he was not a fluke after his first-time All-Star Cy Young season. And in 2013, he would start to show it when the Dodgers made it back to the playoffs. In 2013, which would be Clayton Kershaw's 6th season with the Los Angeles Dodgers, he would start 33 games in a season where the Dodgers would finish with a 92-70 record, which would be 6 more wins than the previous season. And Clayton Kershaw, in his 3rd straight All-Star season, would finish with a 16-9 record, which of course is the second time in his career he had at least eclipsed 15. He threw a 1.83 ERA, which is the lowest that he had ever put up in his career, or up at that point. In his first 6 seasons, that's the lowest he had ever put up in a season. He would lead the National League in the lowest ERA for the 3rd year in a row, which is a GOAT feat, by the way. But of course, I didn't give it to him at that point. He threw 3 complete games, 2 of which were shutouts, leading the National League. He threw 236 innings. Up until that point, that was the most amount of innings that any player had pitched. That was the most innings that Clayton Kershaw had pitched up until that point in his career. And in those 236 innings, he allowed 164 hits. That's a difference of about 68 batters right there. And continuing on, he would go on and strike out 232 batters, which would lead the National League. The only thing that didn't win him the Triple Crown that year was wins, but he still led the National League in strikeouts and ERA. So naturally, in addition to getting his 3rd All-Star of his career in his 6th season with the Dodgers, he would also earn his 2nd Cy Young, which would put him in elite Hall of Fame category just that early in his career, and it would only get better from there. Once they made the playoffs, they would end up beating the Braves in the NLDS, and they would end up losing to the Cardinals in the NLCS, and this would be the year that the Cardinals would end up going to the World Series. But Clayton Kershaw was continuing to get better and better, and after winning 2 Cy Youngs in 3 years, I mean, most people were starting to recognize him as the best, and especially during the height of his prime. This would transition into Clayton Kershaw's 7th season with the Dodgers, which would be his 4th All-Star season. In Clayton Kershaw's 4th All-Star season, he would go through some injury troubles, but he would eventually come back. He would start 27 games in a season where the Los Angeles Dodgers would finish with a 94-68 record, which gave them 2 more wins than they had won the previous season. In this season, Clayton Kershaw put up a 21-3 record. That is the best win percentage he had ever put up in his career ever, and that's the first time he had ever led all starting pitchers in win-loss percentage ever. The only time he's ever done that in his career up to date. It is the 4th time in his career he would have put up the lowest ERA in the entire National League. Of course, doing it for the 4th time in a row. He put up a 1.77 ERA, and he finished with 6 complete games, 2 shutouts. And he pitched 198 innings. The fact that he did all that in less than 200 innings is insane. He would allow 139 hits in those 198 innings, which is about a difference of about 60 hit batters. And then he would strike out about 239 batters in those 198 innings. The only thing that didn't win him the Triple Crown this year was strikeouts. And then in addition to all that, he would win the Cy Young for the 3rd time in 4 years. In his first 4 years of being an All-Star, he had won the Cy Young 3 times. And he would also go on to win the MVP of the National League after only playing 27 games. This would be the first season since 2009 in which he had played under 200 innings and he had won the MVP. And once he had won the MVP as a pitcher and his 3rd Cy Young, I think that for me is when he established himself as one of the greatest pitchers of all time. And had I been doing this show in 2014, Clayton Kershaw would have been a GOAT all the way back then. That was when he was about where Aaron Donald is about right now. And once they made it to the playoffs, they would end up losing to the Cardinals in the NLDS. But once again, great season for Clayton Kershaw. That would go down in the books, and of course, it would transition into yet another All-Star season. In 2015, in his age 27 season, his 8th season in the league, he would go on and lead the National League in starts for the 2nd year in a row, as he had 33 starts in a season where the Los Angeles Dodgers finished with a 92-70 record. That is the 3rd straight season they would make the playoffs, of course. The 3rd straight season they would win the National League West, and following Clayton Kershaw's MVP season, he would put up a 16-7 record and a 2.13 ERA. And of course, up until that point, this is the 7th year in a row in which he's posting up an ERA that's below 3 and 2.13 and sitting towards like the lower end. But I mean, at that point, that's just what he's putting in like on the regular. He pitched 4 complete games, leading the National League for the 2nd and the last time the most recent time that he's led the National League in complete games. He led the National League in shutouts as he had 3 of them on the season. That was the 2nd time in which he's done that. And it was the only time in his career thus far in which he's led the National League in innings pitched, as he pitched 232 after he pitched 6 less games the previous season. In those 232 games, he would allow 163 hits, which is a difference of about 70 batters. And then he would end up striking, 70 less hitters than innings. I'm sorry. And then he would end up striking he struck out 301 batters in those 232 innings. That is the only time Clayton Kershaw has ever eclipsed the number 300 strikeouts in his career. And the fact that he did that after his MVP, I mean, he's just continuing to add numbers to his legacy. He would go on to be named an All-Star for the 5th time in his career. He would finish 3rd in Cy Young voting, and he finished 10th in MVP voting. And in his 5th year of being an All-Star, the Dodgers, they would lose in the NLDS to the Mets, who would end up going to the World Series and losing to the Royals, for context. So that's what was going on then. And this would, of course, transition into Clayton Kershaw's 2016 season, his age 28 season. This season, he was hit with a back injury. So, of course, for the first couple months of this season, he was kind of there and back. But By the end of the season, he had caught full fire, but before then, he was named an All-Star. In 2016, in his sixth consecutive year of being an All-Star, he would start 21 seasons in a year that the Dodgers would finish with a 91-71 record. That is the fourth consecutive year in which they have won the National League West. And in this season, Clayton Kershaw would put up a 12-4 record with a 1.69 ERA, which is insane. That is the third time in his career he put up an ERA below 2. And to this date, that is the lowest ERA Clayton Kershaw has ever put up in a season. That's the lowest ERA he's ever put up in a season in his career. And of course, for most players that would be. For most players that ever existed, that would be. He threw 3 complete games. He threw 3 shutouts, all 3 of his complete games were shutouts. And that would be the most recent time, not the most recent time he led the league in shutouts, and at the same time, the most recent time that Clayton Kershaw has ever thrown a complete game shutout in his entire 13-year MLB career. He threw for 149 innings, and in those 149 innings, he only allowed 97 hits. Even though he only pitched 149 innings, that is the only time for a full season he's ever allowed a single-digit amount of hits, even though it's the least amount of innings he's ever put up in a full season, but I digress. And he would also strike out 172 batters in those 149 innings. Yet another season down the line, his 7th in a row, in which he had more strikeouts than innings pitched and less hits allowed than innings pitched. And this would be his 6th straight All-Star season, as he finished 5th in Cy Young voting. Once the Dodgers made the playoffs in 2016, they would beat the Nationals in the NLDS. And this was also the season that Corey Seager won Rookie of the Year and Dave Roberts won Manager of the Year. They would end up losing in the NLCS to the Chicago Cubs the year that the Chicago Cubs would go on and win the World Series for themselves and end the over 100-year World Series drought for that city. But this would transition into Clayton Kershaw's 2017 season, which would be his 7th straight All-Star game, or his 7th straight All-Star season in an amazing stretch of baseball. And this would be the end of his All-Star stretch. In his 7th consecutive All-Star season, in his 10th season playing baseball for the Dodgers, he would start 27 games in a season where the Dodgers would finish with 104 wins and 58 losses, a 13-win increase from the year before, and this would be the 5th straight year that the Dodgers won the NL West, and this would be the year that Cody Bellinger won Rookie of the Year. In this season, Clayton Kershaw would finish with an 18-4 record. He led the National League in wins for the 3rd and the most recent time in his career. He would finish with a 2.31 ERA, which is the most recent time in his career and the 5th time that he had the best ERA in the entire National League. So I mean that's the 5th time in his 7-year stretch of being an All-Star of that stretch of straight All-Star games. And in the 175 games he pitched, he would allow 136 he would only allow 136 hits and strike out 202 batters. Yet another season in which he threw over 200 strikeouts. At this point, this would be season number 7, and this would be the most recent season to date that he has thrown over 200 strikeouts in a season. And he would go on, in addition to making the All-Star game for his 7th year in a row, he would finish a runner-up in the Cy Young. And as the only thing that he missed out for his second possible Triple Crown was his strikeouts. This is the 3rd year that he missed the Triple Crown on one category. But following this incredible season, the Dodgers would go on to beat the Diamondbacks in the NLDS. They beat the Cubs in the NLCS, and they would go on to lose in the Astros in the World Series 4-3. And of course, they did find out eventually that the Astros cheated in the World Series, but the Astros they got immunity for the deal. So for now, it will go down in the history books as a win for the Astros. And this would be the first time Clayton Kershaw had made it all the way to the World Series, and he and the Dodgers had lost that series after making it incredibly far. And that was the last season that Clayton Kershaw had led the league in wins and ERA, just to give a sense of the Dodgers title run and where he fits into that. So this would transition into his 2018 season, which would be his 11th season for the Dodgers, and he would go on to start 26 games as he would deal with injury yet again. And in this season, the Dodgers finished with a 92-71 record as they would go on to win the NL West for the 6th year in a row. In this season, Clayton Kershaw would finish with a 9-5 record as he finished with a 2.73 ERA. This would end up being the 10th year in a row that he pitched a sub-3 ERA, as in he did it for a decade straight. A decade straight of MLB seasons, this man pitched a sub-3 ERA, meaning he allowed a run he allowed less than one run in every 3 innings of baseball that he played. But of course, continuing on, he would pitch 161 innings. And in those 161 innings, he would allow 139 hits, and he would strike out 155 batters. This would be the first time since his rookie year in which he didn't have more strikeouts than innings pitched, but he still had more innings pitched than hits allowed, which is what you're looking for at the end of the day anyway. And he would also go on to miss the All-Star game for the first time since 2010. And once they made the playoffs, the Dodgers would end up beating the Braves in the NLDS. They would beat the Brewers in the NLCS the year that Christian Yelich was going insane and won the MVP. And they would go on to lose in the World Series to his future teammate Mookie Betts. But of course, Clayton Kershaw would put up a lot of, and of course, with the Dodgers having won the NL West for the past 6 years, and then Kershaw playing in a 2-year stretch before that, he was also amassing just innings pitched, strikeouts thrown in the playoffs. So of course, I'm just going to add a little bit more context right about here. And this would transition into Clayton Kershaw's 2019 season, which would be his last full season of baseball because, of course, 2020 was shortened to 60 games due to COVID. But in 2019, Clayton Kershaw would start 28 games and play 29 in a season where the Los Angeles Dodgers would finish with a 106-56 record. That would be 14 more wins than the previous season, 2 more wins than they had won in 2017. And I believe it's the most wins the Dodgers have ever put up, at least while being in the city of Los Angeles. And more than they have since they've been named the Dodgers, or at least the most that they've won in a season in Los Angeles Dodgers franchise history. And this was also the season that Cody Bellinger won MVP. In this season, in his return to form in his 8th All-Star season in his career, Clayton Kershaw would end up starting 20 of those 29 games. He put up a 16-5 record with a 3.03 ERA. That is the first time in his career he put up an ERA over 3 since 2008, which would end his decade-long streak of years in which he had done it. But continuing on, he would go on to pitch 178.1 innings. He would only allow 148 hits, striking out 189 batters. So, of course, he went back up to striking out more batters than innings pitched. And, of course, he had more innings pitched than hits allowed. And then this would go, and in addition to making the All-Star team, he would finish 8th in Cy Young voting. This is the most recent All-Star team he would make, of course, because there were no All-Star teams I don't think there were any All-Star teams this most recent season. And following that, the Los Angeles Dodgers would go on to lose in the first round to the Nationals after the season that the Nationals would go on to win the World Series in 2019. That was the last full season of MLB baseball. And of course, after all this, Clayton Kershaw still had not won a championship after this incredible career. And many pundits, of course, were saying that was the one thing that he was missing. And of course, this would transition us into Clayton Kershaw's most recent season, his 13th season in the MLB, his age 32 season. In 2020, he would go on to make 10 starts in a season where the Los Angeles Dodgers would finish with a 43-17 record. As of course, it would take him a couple of weeks to get settled in the season, as of course he was dealing with some injury stuff. And in the 10 games this season, he would finish with a 6-2 record. So, of course, only 2 of those games went to a no decision. He finished with a 2.16 record, yet another season in which he had pitched a sub-3 ERA, his 11th to date. The only 2 in which he didn't were the year prior and his rookie season. He would go on to pitch 58 innings in those 10 games. And he would allow 41 hits in those 58 innings, and he struck out 62 batters. So once again, another season in which he struck out more batters than innings pitched and had more innings pitched than hits allowed. And he would finish 9th in Cy Young voting, and he would finish 9th in he would finish on the All-MLB second team, the second year that they started making All-MLB teams, just to get a sense of what he was doing in the regular season. But this would go down as probably his most memorable season because of what Clayton Kershaw was able to do in the postseason. So in the postseason, he would go on first to take on the Milwaukee Brewers in the first round because they had to shorten the season to 60 games. The MLB had decided to expand the playoffs to 8 teams in the American League and the National League to add a round just to make it to make it more fun for all the players involved. In the first series in the very first series against the Brewers, Clayton Kershaw, in his only game, he pitched about 8 innings. He'd allow 3 hits, and he'd strike out 13 batters while allowing no runs. So, of course, he would get them past that. In the next round against the San Diego Padres, in the one game that he would pitch, he will go on to allow 3 earned runs, striking out 6 batters on the day and pitching 6 innings. And in that series, the Dodgers would end up sweeping the Padres 3-0. And then in the NLCS, they would face off against the Atlanta Braves. And in his game against the Braves, he would end up giving up 4 runs and 7 hits in about 7 innings against the Braves. But again, they're the Braves. The Braves were the best offense in all of baseball in 2020. And they were able to beat the Braves 4-3 after coming back down from behind. And this would transition us into the World Series where they faced off against the Tampa Bay Rays, the top team in the American League. I think because the Dodgers had more wins than everybody else in baseball. And the Dodgers started Clayton Kershaw for 2 of those games, and in the 2 games that he started, he would pitch 11.2 innings. He allowed a total of 7 hits in those 11 innings. He allowed 3 runs total, struck out 14 batters in those 11 innings pitched, finished with a 2.31 ERA, and he would be a big contributor as the Dodgers would beat the Tampa Bay Rays 4-2 in this most recent World Series that gave Clayton Kershaw the crown finally. And even though LeBron James is the king and the greatest athlete to ever play in the city of Los Angeles, this World Series win officially crowned Clayton Kershaw as the king of LA. And with that said, this transitions us to where we are about right now. Following a very long off season, we are going to go right into Clayton Kershaw's age 33 season, his 14th season for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And just looking at the player that he is, of course, he's going down as one of the greatest players of all time. He's an 8-time All-Star. In addition to being a World Series champion, he's been the MVP of the National League. He's won the Cy Young in the National League. He's been named the best pitcher in the entire National League 3 times. He's been named to the All-MLB second team once because that's a very new team. He earned the pitching triple crown in his 4th season pitching for the Dodgers in his very first All-Star season. He also won the Gold Glove the only year he won it that year. He's led the National League in wins 3 times. He's led the National League in earned runs average, which is basically the point of pitching, to not allow any runs. He's led the league in that 5 times, which is half a decade. He's also led the league in strikeouts 3 times. He pitched a no-hitter in his MVP season. The fact that he won an MVP in 27 games is yet another incredible feat. This is also a man that won 3 MVPs in a 4-year stretch. In the 1 year he didn't win MVP, he was the runner-up to the MVP, and he was putting up numbers that were deadly close. We're talking about a guy that went a full decade who pitched an ERA below 3. And of course, it's a transition to where we are right now. And of course, as long as this man is healthy, he will be one of the best pitchers that the game has ever seen. And I think his numbers, his accolades, they all speak for themselves. And I'm glad to have reported on the season in which he won his very first championship. And with that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to all 36 minutes of my piece. I hope all is well, and if you ever get a chance, check out my boy Clayton Kershaw. He's wearing number 22 for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he will be receiving a ring in the upcoming weeks. And with that said, I have no idea how much damage the Dodgers are going to inflict. All I know is that when Clayton Kershaw is going to pitch, it'll be very hard for the opposing team to get a hit, no matter who that team is. With that said, thank you once again for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and once all of the exhibitions for today are done, I will get back to you tomorrow on Saturday, March 20th, 2021 out here in this quarantine. And I do have another individual profile tomorrow, as I will do one on Brad Hand, the replacement pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, who turns 31 tomorrow. And last but not least, I want to say happy 33rd birthday to Clayton Kershaw. Once again, I hope all is well. I'm James Sims. This is The Elite, and I'm signing off right here and now. Peace out.